Hello, fans of Cheese of Ages. Here we're going to be doing a quick review of the Monk's Playtest debut in the DnD Next Playtest packet. I'm not going to go into a whole thing of calling this a whole fifth wave, because it's not. It's just an additional class and some maneuvers. And there's not really too much to talk about with the Monk in its debut, because it's basically everything a Monk has been in previous editions. It's kind of a 3.5 version look at the Monk, where you've got pretty much everything the 3.5 Monk's got, but you use expertise dice for flurry of blows and various combat techniques. There's nothing really mechanically wrong with the Monk in its current form, per se. There's the whole alignment restriction thing, which I've never been a fan of, but that's neither here nor there. Alignment restriction should be an optional thing for DMs to put in there, not the default rules, in my opinion. But that's mainly me and the Paladin. In 3.5, the Paladin was just the holy lawful good warrior. He was Mr. Boy Scout, and being lawful good means that only lawful good deities really could have Paladins. Depending on how flexible your DM was to interpretation of that. I personally prefer the 4th edition version of the Paladin, where you could be a Paladin of any god. But that's just me, and that's a tangent. The only thing that's mechanically wrong with the Monk is not really a mechanical flaw with the Monk. It's the simple fact that there's mechanical flaws with a certain other class in the packet. In its current form, the Rogue is incredibly flawed, in a sense. As if you are going to do a sneaky class that specializes in infiltrating a place and with skill and subterfuge and stabbing a guy in the back and killing him. If you're going to play that kind of thing, the last class you're going to play, well, aside from maybe a cleric or a wizard, the last class you'd want to play of the classes that are combat based would be a rogue, and some could argue you would even play a cleric before you would play this version of the rogue, but that's debatable, because for one, the fighter can be configured to be the sneaky guy with the simple addition of themes and backgrounds. Backgrounds and specialties. He can get every skill that the rogue can access and needs to get in there. He has more combat techniques to make him better in a fight, and can do exactly the same thing as sneak attack, but not need advantage. And he can actually viably 2-weapon fight. So if he's every bit as sneaky, and every bit as subterfuge, but he's better at stabbing people, why would you play a rogue if you're going with an assassin-style rogue? It's a design flaw. Adding options is well and dandy, but taking them away is not. You don't play an assassin and play a fighter. You should have the option to be a assassin-y like fighter, but when you think an assassin-y backstabby guy, you think a rogue, some kind of rogue. If you want to be a thievy, sneaky, stabby guy, rogue, with the option of having a fighter that can do roguish things. That's all I'm saying. Actually, it's not all I'm saying, because not only does the fighter serve as a more viable rogue, rogue isn't even in second place for rogue duty, because here comes the Monk now. The Monk has every single thing that the fighter does have working for it, as far as being able to easily do sneak attack damage without needing advantage. But it can also have advantage more easily, because it can use its combat expertise dice to add to its movement speed, making it almost impossible to keep a Monk from flanking you. And it can, because it doesn't use sneak attack, it can viably 2-up and fight as well. And it can go even further than that in the regard of it can viably 2-up and fight and get a 3rd attack from 1st level. So that's even more combatness. And he's lightly armored by default and is designed to be lightly armored. In fact, he's designed not to be wearing any armor at all. So he's going to be just as sneaky at base without involving expertise dice as a rogue. And again, he could just take a background and a theme, a specialty, and have every skill necessary to be rogue-like and infiltrate and be subterfuge. And the only thing that gives the rogue any sort of edge is his ability to boost his skill check results. And in my eyes, just the ability to add a D4 to the result of a skill check isn't really, in the grand scheme of things, enough to set it apart. And in its role, it's still only barely at all viable in its own role, comparably to other options. Because for a large majority of the time, when you make a skill check, everyone else is going to be capable of succeeding the large majority of the time if they are trained in it and have the associated ability score as their thing. One dex-based class is going to be just as good at sneaking as the rogue on average, because all you need to do is succeed. Mind you, the rogue can fail less often, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not enough to tip the balance in the favor of the rogue. When the rogue amounts to just that one thing, when the other classes have all these other things working for them. If you go with a roguish fighter, and you're lightly armored, and you're doing all these things, and you have all these combat techniques, and you're like super stabby, you have the option of, oh, this isn't working for me, so I'm going to just throw on plate armor. And, I still use my finesse weapons, and have much higher defenses, and still be a stabby. He has the option of completely changing his role. And you can just go in there and tank, or he can just go be a rogue, It's, and the monk can do all of these things really. He can self-heal with his dice. He can freaking super speed around. He can do all of these freaking things. He can attack like 3 targets at once. He can, he has all of this stuff. All of these things. And all the rogue's got is that one defining thing. And that's adding his expertise dice to a skill check, which, 3/4 of the time won't even freaking matter. You need to step up the rogue a bit. The rogue is too heavily nerfed, and the monk just makes all of the rogue all the more useless. Mechanically, though, the monk works just fine. In a vacuum, where there's no other problems in the system, and everybody is in their role and uncontested for their role in it, the monk does everything it's supposed to do, how it's supposed to do it, and does it well. Some people would argue that, it's too much of a focus on unarmed combat, but that's frankly what the large majority of people go into a monk to be. If you're going to be a freaking weapon-fighting guy, play a fighter. But you can just as easily use spears and all those other things that the monk is combat capable with his maneuvers and such. It's no great focus on unarmed combat with this. I don't see where those comments are coming from, aside from the fact that apparently those people aren't reading the dang thing. Everything about the monk works fine in a vacuum. Unfortunately, the rogue in its current form exists. And it's not viable for its own job because it's too heavily nerfed. Thankfully, according to comments from Wizards of the Coast, in the next release, rogues will have more sneak attack damage in some fashion, and will have more HP, so that its fragility is based on its armor rather than its hit points. So I basically see maybe it being as viable as the monk, but its backstabby damage is like maybe 2 points more, where it's like equivalent to having a d6 for sneak attack, which is where it should be. It makes it a heck of a lot more viable of an option, where you're not that much of a huge difference, and a sneaky fighter is viable still as an option because he's got all these combat techniques and all these things because he's a fighter. But the rogue has this thing where he's got this he can infiltrate slightly better and more consistently, and he can when he works hard, he can just get in there and sneak attack you. Personally, I want the boost to the sneak attack damage that's coming to be an option rather than the standard. Possibly paying for a little bit of the skill boosty thing, like make it the backstabby rogue a little less of a skill monkey kind of thing. That would be something I would be interested in seeing. When I house rule it in my playtest games, because the monk is not the monk, but the rogue is completely useless, is I have it where you can take one of your skill trainings away and then add a static +2 to damage when you strike with advantage. But how that balances out is neither here nor there. I add it as like a rogue scheme rather than the default, and that way you're a little bit backstabby even if you don't sneak attack. So you have a little bit extra mechanical advantage as well, because when any other backstabby rogue has to go through all this trouble to use his points to tumble more consistently to get in there, and then next turn sneak attack, you can do that and use your expertise dice to get into an advantage position via tumble and stuff, and then get a little bit of damage extra. You can do as much damage as that guy would do on a sneak attack if he was already standing there, because you are a super backstabby specialist kind of guy. I like it personally, but it's kind of one of those things that would require a bit more testing to see if that's actually a viable option or is too much or too little. But that's what this playtest here is for. And summary. Monk's fine mechanically. It's everything you would expect the monk to be. It's pretty much the 3.5 monk, but with expertise dice. And the rogue, unfortunately, is the only strike against the monk, because the monk coming in here and being the lightly armored, sneak-capable guy that can do damage, extra damage when it whumps someone, makes the rogue completely useless. More useless than it was. And it's arguable whether that skill boostiness, which is more of a consistency rather than a magnitude boost, as I explained, is as weak as I'm making it out to be. But yeah, rogue needs buff. Monk is fine. Monk is good. I enjoy the monk. I like this monk. It's good. It's viable. It can spread out its damage and its flurry of blowsiness. It can whomp hard within one strike against one opponent. It functions and does everything I would want a monk to do. You can even use weapons with it, and reasonably viably too. But it doesn't venture too far into the fighter's territory because it's so lightly armored, and it's only got a D8 hit die. And plus, if you're using your fists, there's no racial weapon bonus to fists. So, fighter is still much higher in the ballpark category there. So, anyway, that said, I hope this was reasonably concise, even though it was 13 minutes for basically just one class. I hope you enjoyed it. This is Jesus of Ages, signing off.